Hello, my friends. This is life coach Mike Trugman, and welcome to an episode of Mike's Search for Meaning. I'm after some big questions. Why are we here? What makes a fulfilling life? How can we grow individually and collectively? Each episode, I'll dive deep with leaders who are doing great work in the world and see how they organize their life. Books read, value systems, resources used, and stories that show how each of you can create the life and the world of your dreams. All right, Derick, I am excited to dive into this co-creation with you. For those who are listening, Derick and I, there's a resonance that we have in conversation. We're just kind of following that into recorded dialogue and seeing where it goes. One of the things that you and I have really been resonating on, Derick, is we really connect to the power of coaching and have wanted to speak that out loud to a broader audience. And so I would love to trade blows with you, if you will, about what brings us to coaching, why we're so passionate about this as a vocation, not only as a vocation, but really as a way of living and being is the way that I sense it. And so could you bring us closer to the way that you look at coaching in the ways that you've already beautifully, eloquently described it to me off camera? I would love to make that available to listeners now.
Mike, I think it's such an important question. It was like a couple weeks ago. I've seen actually a series of articles in the New York Times about coaching, and to situate the question, one was about the dark side of coaching. I guess I would say where the article was basically saying, profiling a bunch of people who spent a lot of money on coaching and feel like they didn't get a lot of value, right? And I think that's a very important thing to factor in, or I think about a lot, right? Which is coaching is such a new field, and unlike psychotherapy and other fields that have, say, medicine, you have, it's a pretty rigorous process to become a medical doctor for good reason, and so coaching is in the process of being institutionalized, meaning, and there are certifying bodies and that kind of thing. And so that discussion for me points to like what makes coaching great, like what are some when is it not great? Because I think when is it not great is just as important to account for, because it points us towards the direction of where great could be. And that leads me to like one of the books that, as I was sussing out what to do with my career, and I did strongly consider becoming a therapist, was Abraham Maslow's book, The Furthest Reaches of Human Nature. And he, for those who don't know, is, words like self-actualization come from his research, and he was pivotal because at the time, so much of our research in the scientific world, both the hard and soft sciences, were around pathology. So we were, all right, someone who's severely debilitated by something, how do we bring them to normal? And what he said is like, we also need to be studying the very best amongst us and see what can we learn from them. And so, his definition of self-actualization was to be all you can be. Kind of sounds a little, cliche in a little bit, but he meant by that something pretty deep, which is a sense that we have something we might call potential, right? And so, if we take the old understanding of philosophy as a preparation for death, meaning, what does it mean to die well? Abraham Maslow, who was also a philosopher, his answer was to that we lived in such a way that we took seriously this feeling or this sensation or this, experience that we all have of quote unquote our potential, and and so on and so forth. And so in that book, he uh, said that in the future, we would need what he calls a meta counselor. And so he was basically, in my view, articulating the beginnings of what I now understand as coaching. And by meta counselor, he meant people who can help us discern what our deep values are, people who can help us when we're in therapy and therapy isn't working, or say we want to amplify therapy and go beyond it. We're going to need people for that. He called them as, vocation counselors, but vocation in the deepest sense, like our calling. He was basically saying, hey, we're going to really need people that can support us with those questions. And I had a lot of resonance going back to what you and I brought us together around that notion. He certainly didn't imply that therapists can't help us with those kind of needs, which raises the second question, which is, what is the relationship between coaching and therapy? I don't want to say that only coaches work on these problems and therapists works on these problems. I actually think that any particular problem we have, we should view it from many different lenses. So, in fact, that's one understanding of creativity, right? Let's say I'm trying to figure out how to lose weight. We normally just think of a nutritionist or maybe a doctor as helping us with that problem, but we do ourselves a disservice if we only bring that to them. It could be really interesting to bring that into our therapist, to bring that to a friend, to a parent, to a coach, and through all these different professional embodiments, we might learn something, new about, in this case, how to lose weight. And so, I want to turn it back over to you, Mike, because now it's, folding into a question like what makes coaching different. But reading, I guess the last thing I'll say is it's really through reading that I found a home in coaching. Through reading different people talk about what we need, what's needed. And I found this really interesting convergence between scientists, doctors, philosophers, therapists speaking for this need for a new kind of, a new kind of professional. And so, for me, coaching is one way in which this new form is coming into being. I'm curious. I don't know if there's something in that you want to respond to, but I would love to hear, also how you came to coaching.
Yeah, there's plenty to respond to in there, but I'll share why I'm a coach too. And I think for me, it comes from a deeply personal place, and from the deeply personal has become my desire to be of service to more people because of how much it's impacted me. So I'll start there. I think it might be a little bit of a gross oversimplification, but it feels pretty true to me that for most of my life, I felt in a lot of ways less than, like it was hard for me to find where I really belonged in the world. I always kind of looked like I had it together. As a guy, I fit a lot of the traditional masculine roles, like being good at sports. I'm tall. I'd say I'm pretty good looking. I'm intellectually smart. I went into accounting as my first field. And so I'm pretty, in some ways, the story I told myself was I've got a lot of these great characteristics, and yet there's this ache inside of me, this feeling that something's not quite right. And I really always felt like, I guess like scared, really scared of knowing myself and scared of showing myself to other people. And coaching has helped me make deep contact, not only deep contact with who I am, but like kind of celebrating and embracing all of who I am. And like what an incredible gift it is. I've felt, as a result of coaching, I have felt liberated to be who I am and releasing all of that energy I used to spend hiding myself in plain sight now kind of putting both feet on the ground and saying, this is who I am, which isn't to say that I don't get scared, but it is to say that when I meet life's challenges, I'm much more resourced to do so. And then when I drift, I come back on track a lot more easily. So coaching has helped me in a way reorient my life from really playing a lot of defense, like hiding myself and don't show people this part of yourself. Don't be shy. Don't be awkward. All these things I really feared about myself, to learning how to play offense on my life. I am the creator of my experience of life. And wow, I can actually tap into what my deepest desires are and make them happen with ease sometimes, not even having to push so hard. And coaching to me is a field that helps not just me, but helps people at large tap into that, if that's something you're curious about. So that word potential that you invoked it's I think it's been hijacked a little bit by the personal development industry, but in some way or another, I think all of us are either lightly tickled or sometimes hit over the head with a sledgehammer with this question of like, who am I really? What am I here to do in my life? What is life all about? And to me, coaching really honors those questions in a beautiful way that supports people in their becoming, and also honors this, again, maybe is getting towards the crosshairs of therapy a little bit, but it honors your material. Like what are the unconscious programmings that you have, or put in more lay and simple terms, what are the conditionings, the patterns that you have from your family of origin, from the culture that you grew up in. So I grew up in an affluent suburb of New York City, and that has its own set of belief systems and ways of operating. And my family has their own belief systems and ways of operating and views about money and views about religion and politics. And so like all of these things, whether we're paying attention to it or not, they are shaping the way that we move through our life. And coaching can help us examine that from a place of, instead of I just accept them as true, I get to be the creator of my life in authorship, whatever way you want to use it, like actively creating the life that you want, which can be really deeply uncomfortable at first, but also really powerful. So the long and short of why I became a coach is it helped me step into my power in who I am, and not from a place of where I used to be, which was I'm doing all these things based on implicit broken agreements of, if I'm an accountant, that means I'll be celebrated and loved, and all the other, if I'm nice, if I'm, all these other things are going to make me feel like I want to feel. That hasn't been true for me. And so I will now pause there. We've both shared a mouthful. Seems like a good insights on both angles, both ends here. But so what's cooking for you after both of our shares?
Yeah, I love about you, Mike, is how the kind of questions that you ask, even that. And I think that as coaches, leaders, as parents, and I think that's the other piece. What can we learn from coaching is I think it was the coach Rich Liffen. I love how he said another word for coaching is leadership, and so and for me, I resonate with that, but I resonate with more with it's a form of like just caretaking, being, when we're with another person, right, could be more aware of what's possible in a human interaction. Think that the possibility that emerges for our culture is something really important. So kind of what I mean by that is James Hillman, the psychotherapist writer, he has critiques therapy from within, meaning he was a therapist, and because of that, as I think we all should do in our professions, is what do we want to celebrate our profession, and then what needs attention, a critique, right? Doesn't have to be a judgmental thing, but just taking an honest, balanced look at anything means you got to look at both sides. And so he he said, we've had about 100 years of therapy. How's that working out for us?
Mm.
which is a little cheeky. But what he, and, I think it equally could apply to coaching. So what's cooking for me is what I've come to realize is, and I really appreciate how you mentioned the personal side of how you came to coaching, because honestly, that's the biggest driver of how I also became to coaching. And I'll tie this to the Hillman point in a second. I came to coaching because my main form of suffering was this existential angst around, I felt like my life was passing me by, and I still hadn't figured out the answer to the question, what do I want to do with my life? And I think that's maybe something that's distinctive of being in your 20s and 30s, is this feeling of life passing you by. That might be just a universal feature. But it makes me wonder, how much of that is a result that in our education system, we don't give enough attention to that question and give it the proper reverence that it deserves. And so one way that I see coaching is it's kind of picking up the slack, or picking up the pieces that have been left out oftentimes in our upbringing. How should we eat well? How should we move our bodies? How should we look at this question of career and meaningful work, right? I went to a really good university, and we had not a single class on that question, preparing me for, quote unquote, the real world and adult life, so in some ways, I think of coaching as organized around a set of questions that, if we engage those questions, we understand as coaching, they add a lot of value to our life. And so with that said, as it connects to Hillman's observation around therapy, what I've come to discover and what's cooking for me is that as I came to coaching because I had a personal question. As I engaged that personal question, I found myself changing the kinds of goals that I set. In a sense, I answered one problem to discover a new problem. And I'm grateful for that, because for me, problems are what give life so much meaning, And so we like author, but in a letters to a young poet, Rilke, right? He mentioned, he's writing to a young poet who had sought counsel, saying, hey, I feel like my life's passing me by, and you've accomplished so much with your life. Can you give me advice? And he says back to him, have patience with all those questions that remain unanswered in your heart and whatnot. And so an insight that I found so valuable from Hillman, and is something that I find in coaching, is that our minds and our sense of mental health and emotional well-being are at the root interrelational, and so we could certainly approach it from a personal dimension and look at our parents and our biographies and so on, or we could take the medical model and say, hey, maybe I have an imbalance in this hormone and that hormone and so on. And yeah, those two will prove some insights, but they misunderstand that that's not how our minds are fundamentally structured. Our minds are not reduced only to our biochemistry, and our minds are not only a product of our conditioning. They tell aspects of the truth, but they miss out a lot, and so Hillman was saying that, look, another way to address your personal anxiety or your personal issues is to get involved with society. Go out and volunteer, go out and be an active member of citizenship and citizen, and hold your personal concerns a little less seriously, and I think that, he's adding this kind of balance to the therapy enterprise, and those therapists that come from Freud, right, who kind of overemphasized our personal, the impact of our childhood on our adulthood and so on. So of course there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in therapy. So finally, I see coaching as doing something like what Hellman is doing as well. It's adding a balance to our overall way in which we approach our personal issues and questions. A really good quote coach through the art of good questions will have you start to think about things in a new way, but also think about things that you might have missed because our culture is so deeply embedded in a kind of therapeutic model. I think we we blame our parents for way too much stuff. And there was a therapist in Britain. He has a wonderful article saying we need to reprioritize the idea of the good enough mother, the good
Mm.
enough father. And so again, this sense of coaching as a way to balance our culture raises a really interesting question. So I'll kind of, pause there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on wherever that leads.
I love the way your mind works. It's so different from mine. And I think that's part of what's going to make our joint venture here enlivening and fun and really engaging. Yeah, but like something that you're pointing to is how robust coaching is and how reductive a lot of other modalities can be, whether it's in the medical world of honing in on a specific hormonal imbalance, or even the fact that you go to a neurologist for your brain and then you go to see a specific doctor for your foot, that the human organism doesn't work in the way that the system is set up for right now, which is isolated, specialized in one area. And coaching isn't a fix for all of that, but rather is something that honors it's a holistic approach to honoring all of what someone is and our interconnectedness, not only just in our body, but then our interrelatedness. So as you were speaking to that, I was thinking about the way that actually just this morning I was really kind of in a rut, and I had this really beautiful conversation with another coach, and how that shifted so much in me, and kind of energetically the way that we relate to other people has such an impact on our well-being as well. So like it's not explicit in every single coaching arrangement, but I do think as a field, it really does honor so many different elements of the human psyche, the human body, the human spirit too. Like it's a lot of spiritually oriented people or emerging spiritually oriented people like myself come into this field because it's like a mechanism for approaching the inherent uncertainty of life. But I'm also noticing the way that it's like I'm really loving this, and that we're also kind of veering into just two coaches waxing poetic about our industry. And one intention that each of us had with recording here is we want this to be a service to our clients as well. And so I would love to, unfortunately, we're a little bit short on time today, but in the last 10 minutes or so, I think it'd be really great to riff back and forth about maybe one practical challenge each that our clients are bringing to us and ways that we help our client organize around that challenge to give a kind of very tangible way that people can look at challenges that they're facing in their life.
That's such an important question, and it may be certainly personally subscribed to the school of philosophy known as the pragmatists. I'm not only that, but John Dewey, Eugene Genlin, and others, their criterion, their definition of truth. So what is true? It's what allows you to practically engage with things that you're encountering in your life. And I think that's so powerful. It's a very powerful notion. And so oftentimes, and I have found, come in with a very concrete, specific, practical challenge. I do work with people on quote unquote health, and I hold that lightly because, I don't mean by health just exercise and nutrition and so on and so forth, and I like to start with clients is just help them notice how they're thinking about the practical problem.
Mm.
Um, and such questions like, what do you think is the problem here? So you know, you're trying to lose weight. Like, what is it that you think is the problem, right? And they might say something, well, I don't know enough, or I eat I'm good at breakfast, but then work is work, and then I come home and I eat junk food. So maybe work or my stress is and so on and so forth. But beginning, I think that a very practical issue is that we've been disconnected from our own thinking, from our own experience. We have learned a habit of constantly looking outside of our own lived experience for solutions. And I think this is really important to notice, because the way in which we stay in that habit of mind is we get a coach,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so as a coach, how can I help someone reconnect them to their own internal sense of what is good or bad for them, what is true or not true for them? I don't want to play a part, as much as it might feel good to play the role as the expert and so on and so forth. If a question is asked to me, I want to turn it back and elicit their own thinking about it. In a sense, it's kind of like how Socrates did it, in his dialogues, right? They were always set up as a dialogue, um, and to connect that to your question is, what I have found is that constantly reflecting people back to their own way in which they're thinking of the problem, they themselves and me, right, come to learn where the blockages are in how they're thinking about the problem. Before we hit record, I mentioned Abe Lincoln's quote, right? If Abe Lincoln is supposedly said, if I had 5 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 4.5 hours sharpening my axe. The way I take that is, we slow down and more thoughtfully consider how you're thinking about your problem or your question. That there's maybe something really valuable in, before we go to solving it and before all that, let's just put this problem, name it, put it between us, and let's just consider it the way we might consider a beautiful piece of music or a poem. And I'm just amazed how little we do that. We want to get rid of the problem so badly that the last thing that it occurs for us to do is to have a conversation with it, to slow down, to consider it more thoughtfully. And for me, that's very practical, and I'm speaking more to a process. And I think one of the byproducts of that process, it's certainly my hope in coaching, that came in with a certain setup. Your mind was set up in a certain way, which is to say you had certain habits of thinking, and that through our process, you developed your thinking. It became deeper and more critical and more nuanced, and so it only come, in a sense, we're modeling it right here, and by just thoughtfully considering, coaching. And in this case right now, and I want to leave the last 5 minutes to you, Mike, but is, you asked me the question, like, what is a practical example, right? And so I guess, to put it very succinctly, is, for me, there's few things more practical in life than examining how we think. And that's a process that we tend to not do, because we're constantly filling up our minds with what other people are thinking. And especially in our world of coaching and personal development, we all love reading other people's books and other people's works, and unfortunately we think, oh, because I'm not a PhD, or because I'm not a subject matter expert, my own thinking about the subject is inherently less valuable. And what I think is very practical is to realize, like, actually your own mind, your own body has a lot to say about a subject, right? And so I want to engage people in that kind of a process. Feel free to veto my answer and say that was still not practical.
No, that was rich. That was really rich. I'm excited to uncover and unearth more of this as we continue to have these conversations. What I will say, which to me is an extension of what you already shared. So a lot of times when people are coming to me, there is a combination of two things. There's something that a future, a desired future that someone's moving towards, and or a painful part of life that is maybe like an existing role or identity that you have that is no longer serving you. So let's just take career as the avenue. A lot of people come to me with the idea of, hey, I have this entrepreneurial venture that I would like to start, and I just haven't started it, don't have the time, whatever it is. Or someone could, like, this is what brought me to coaching. Accounting is not it for me, and I really feel called into a sense of purpose, but I have no idea what I would do with my life. And so there's this thing that I'm desperately moving away from. And so how do I move towards something that I really want in my life? So if we take the example of someone who is at a corporate job and wanting to start an entrepreneurial venture or something more heart-centered, more aligned, more connected to what they really think about and who they really are, I think two things can be really helpful from the onset. One is helping them to connect to what is important to them about the thing that they want to create, right? So we all, whatever stories we tell about ourselves, we are all achieving hundreds of goals every single day, turning on our computer, brushing our teeth, pouring ourselves a glass of water. When something becomes apparent to us as beneficial to our life or solving a problem, we do it. And so one element of what we do, I believe, as coaches, is to help people come to the realization of, oh, of course I'm going to do that thing because it's in service of who I am and how I want to live my life. So connecting to that is really important, and helping someone arrive at that is really important. That I show up to this thing in the same way that, of course, I brush my teeth, and of course I drink a certain amount of water, and of course I move my body. Those could also be areas of examination in coaching too, right? Like maybe some people aren't taking care of their body. And so I guess what I'm saying here is everything that we're doing in our life, if we can slow down enough to connect to it, we're doing it for good reason. It might not be helping us be the person that we say we want to be, but we're doing it. It is serving us in some way or another. And to identify that is really helpful. Which brings me to the next point, which I'll be succinct with because I know we're running low on time here. If you feel really clear on what's important to you and like, yes, that's exactly where I want to go, rah, let's go for it. Almost invariably, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that's in your way, right? And for me, a lot of people come to me, they resonate with my story. And so confidence is a really big one, right? I don't have the confidence, or talking on camera would feel really awkward to me, or whatever way that I would have to be out in the world to make my product or my service more real is really intimidating to me. And so even just helping them to connect to that, what's getting in the way, is really important. And then a lot of times we make the thing that's getting in the way, we extrapolate it way too far down the line. So if I'm too scared to talk on camera right now, that means that I'll never be able to talk on camera. So why would I ever get started? And one of my approaches is, well, what's like the smallest unit of change that would be supportive of you in moving towards that? If that's something that will support you in becoming the entrepreneur or the service provider that you want to be. And so, yeah, like if someone's scared to talk on camera, one assignment that I would immediately give would be, how about you just record a video of yourself that goes nowhere and to no one, and just see if that brings up anything for you. I know it used to for me. And that was one of the first practices that I had. I felt this calling in me to be a coach, to be of service to people, to teach other people how to flourish, how to create a life that is impactful and meaningful for them. And I also was incredibly shy and just had all this fear around being seen. So picking one small unit of change, of practice, and eventually what I find happens, with whether it's with well-being or at other ways of leaving our comfort zone, is that, or meditating is a good example, at first we need to convince ourselves of its merit. And over time, the habit becomes the reward in and of itself. Eating well feels good. Meditating feels good. Recording a podcast, speaking on camera serves people, feels good, is part of my mission. It's part of who I am. And so I think it's imperative of us as coaches to create that. So I feel like we were just getting warmed up, Derick. I know that we're at time and that you have to go serve some of your medicine to one of your clients right now. So is there anything, any parting words on our first little mini experiment conversation here before we jump off?
I think you just hit the nail on the head, which is a full circle with why we became coaches. Is I think we both had an athletic background, and that's the piece. The best athletes in the world have coaches, and it's I think it makes the process not only more effective, just a lot more fun to have someone who's giving you these challenges, who's putting together a training plan. I know what to do in a gym. I can go work out, but I'm always more motivated when I have a coach who writes a training program and I look forward to it and doing it. And so that spirit of coaching I find in you and is for me one of the key components of flourishing is finding people, whether it's a coach or anyone else, who wants to engage you in this process of challenging you and making it extremely doable, like you eloquently just, stated. Like that's brilliant. So I look forward to having many more conversations on this with you, Mike.
Yeah. Same here, Derick. And to anyone who's tuned in, if you're still listening with us, thank you so much for listening. And if you felt inspired by this, if you feel called to action, reach out to me or Derick. I'll make sure to link to each of our contact informations in the show notes. We are, if you can't tell, we're really passionate about what we do and the ways that coaching supports you in becoming who you really are meant to be and how you really want to live your life. I don't think that there's a more precious gift in this world. So if this conversation is leaving you curious, inspired, we would love to hear your thoughts, and please reach out to one of us or both of us. And really thank you so much from the bottom of both of our hearts. Thank you for joining us, for listening. We look forward to serving you with many more of these types of conversations and sending you all lots of love. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to Mike's Search for Meaning. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and leave a review. I look forward to seeing you next time, my friends. And until then, stay safe, stay well, and keep living with purpose. Peace.